When we think about bodybuilding, it's almost automatic to picture massive icons like Arnold Schwarzenegger and Lou Ferrigno. These guys shaped the world's idea of what an athletic body looks like, creating a standard that influenced entire generations. But before we talk about where that ideal really began, it's worth asking, where did this powerful image come from? And why did it become so influential around the world? Even though Arnold and Ferrigno are legendary, they don't exactly represent the modern champion's physique. Today, the Mr. Olympia stage is dominated by shorter athletes, usually under 1.83 meters, 6 feet, but carrying way more muscle volume. It's a shift that stands out. How can bodies so compact hold that much density? The audience notices the difference, but they don't always understand what caused such a radical transformation. This extreme aesthetic didn't appear out of nowhere. It was built over decades, pushed forward by advances in supplements, anabolic steroids, and growth hormone, GH. These compounds completely changed the game, allowing levels of muscular development that simply weren't possible in Arnold's era. And this evolution raised some big questions. How far can the human body really go? And what's the price of pushing those limits? Back in the 1960s, aesthetic bodybuilding finally exploded worldwide thanks to Arnold Schwarzenegger's meteoric rise. With his charisma, drive, and the strategic backing of Joe Weider, he turned bodybuilding into a cultural phenomenon. Suddenly, lifting weights wasn't a niche habit, it was a global aspiration. Hollywood, ads, magazines, and even politics began using the sculpted physique as a symbol of power. As bodybuilding advanced, an incredible transformation took over the stage. Compared to the Arnold era, modern athletes display such an extreme level of muscle mass that it almost defies logic. What used to be considered the human limit became nothing more than the starting point for a new generation of champions who pushed the sport to levels nobody thought possible. The biggest symbol of this revolution is Ronnie Coleman. An 8-time Mr. Olympia champion, he competed at around 134 kilograms, 295 pounds, nearly 30 kilograms, about 65 pounds, heavier than Arnold Schwarzenegger at his peak. And that difference isn't just a number. It represents a complete shift in what the sport considered an ideal physique. Ronnie's presence alone redefined what was achievable, making it clear that a new era had arrived. Right after Ronnie, Jay Cutler stepped in as champion and kept the enormous standard that had already taken over the sport. Even competing at about 127 kilograms, 280 pounds, Jay represented not only size, but also a level of muscular density and symmetry that seemed unreachable in previous decades. It was as if each new generation required an even bigger, more defined, and more extreme physique. This massive leap would have been impossible in bodybuilding's early decades. Back in the 1930s and 40s, athletes had limited access to supplements, scientific knowledge, and, above all, pharmaceutical resources. The sport was almost handmade, built in small gyms and amateur competitions where the focus was more on physical display than on achieving otherworldly proportions. The contrast between those humble beginnings and today's standards shows just how much bodybuilding has evolved, and how the pursuit of perfection keeps intensifying. The turning point came with Joe Weider and the creation of Mr. Olympia in 1965. From that moment on, the sport stopped being a side attraction and became a global stage dedicated exclusively to muscular aesthetics. Weider professionalized bodybuilding, created icons, boosted the industry, and paved the way for athletes like Ronnie and Jay to reach levels no one had ever imagined. Talking about bodybuilding's extreme evolution means we can't ignore the decisive impact of steroids over the decades. The shift began in the 1950s when Dr. John Ziegler introduced Dianabol, the first widely used oral steroid among athletes. From that moment on, a new era began, one where muscle development reached heights that were once completely out of reach. As these substances became more common, physiques changed rapidly. Fuller muscles, more vascularity, sharper definition, all of that became the new standard. Athletes were no longer competing using just training, diet, and genetics. Now they had an additional tool capable of accelerating results and pushing limits. In this new landscape, Larry Scott, the first Mr. Olympia, stood out as a pioneer combining science, training technique, and pharmacology. Soon after, Names like Sergio Oliva and Arnold Schwarzenegger pushed aesthetics even further. Their imposing builds and balanced proportions captivated the world and defined bodybuilding's golden era. But even with their massive impact, none of them could have predicted how far the sport would go in the decades that followed. The next big shift came in the 1980s with Lee Haney, a champion who seemed to represent the human limit. Competing at around 109 kilograms, 240 pounds, Haney had a blend of size, aesthetics, and symmetry that looked unbeatable. But that ceiling didn't last long. In 1992, Dorian Yates stepped on stage and changed everything again. Standing only 1.75 m tall, about 5 feet 9 inches, Yates brought an unreal 122 kilograms, 270 pounds, of completely dry muscle, the result of brutal training and a much more precise use of steroids and growth hormone, GH. That breakthrough opened the door for a new generation of even more mind-blowing athletes. And that's where Ronnie Coleman comes in as the peak of this evolution. As the years went by, bodybuilding fully entered the era of the so-called mass monsters, athletes who pushed muscular size to levels that any natural lifter would consider impossible. Extremely dense, voluminous, almost unreal physiques began to dominate the Mr. Olympia stage, setting a visual standard that redefined what the sport was aiming for. More size, more impact, more physical presence. It was like watching human evolution on fast forward, happening right in front of us. But the interesting thing about this phase is that, despite these jaw-dropping physiques, many of these champions became surprisingly invisible to the general public. Even legends like Phil Heath, a multi-time Mr. Olympia winner, never reached anything close to Arnold Schwarzenegger's cultural impact. They're giants on stage, but almost unknown outside of it. And that raises a pretty important question. How can a sport so visually impressive produce athletes so spectacular, yet so little recognized? Part of the answer lies in how the specialized media covers the sport. There's almost a silence pact around drug use in bodybuilding, something similar to the old kayfabe from professional wrestling, that unspoken agreement to never reveal what happens behind the scenes. Articles, magazines, and TV segments avoid discussing steroids and hormones, as if these massive, surreal physiques were built solely through training and dedication. That creates an illusion that misleads newcomers and hides the real nature of the sport. The official narrative usually repeats that everything comes down to hard training and perfect posing, conveniently ignoring that the chemical component is absolutely essential for reaching these extreme levels of muscle mass. It's like the audience is invited to enjoy the show without ever knowing what really makes that performance possible. And as much as hard work is a huge part of every athlete's life, it simply cannot explain the construction of such extreme bodies on its own. When you look behind the curtains of modern bodybuilding, you find a hidden world operating under the bright stage lights. Even though it's illegal, reports make it clear that steroids are still widely available in gyms and training circles. It's not something openly displayed, but anyone who spent time in that environment knows access never really disappeared. The question is, how does this market keep thriving despite so many restrictions? But this world comes with a price. Issues like hair loss, liver problems, and dehydration are just the beginning. Severe acne and mood swings are also common, leading to episodes of intense aggression, the well-known roid rage. All of this is part of a risk package that many people underestimate because they're focused only on the physical results. Beyond the visible effects, there's also a psychological and emotional toll that often gets ignored. The psychological dependence can be brutal, that feeling that you can't train, can't improve, or even feel good about yourself without using those substances. It's a dangerous cycle, mixing self-esteem, ambition, and the constant urge to push past your limits. When it comes to steroid use in the United States, there's a very clear timeline that reshaped the entire bodybuilding scene. Everything changed in 1990, when the Anabolic Steroids Control Act went into effect, officially classifying steroids as controlled substances. This legal shift didn't just criminalize possession and distribution, it redefined how the sport would function moving forward. Overnight, something once seen as a performance tool became legally treated as a crime. The penalties involved make the strictness of this law pretty clear. Simply possessing steroids without a prescription can land someone up to 1 year in jail, plus a $1,000 fine. If the person gets caught again, the punishment doubles, both the prison time and the fine. For anyone involved in trafficking, things get even more serious. The sentence can reach up to 5 years in prison, along with fines that can go all the way up to $250,000. It's a system designed to shut down any kind of illegal circulation of these substances. But to really understand the impact of this shift, we have to look a bit further back. Roughly 20 years before this law passed, steroid use in hardcore gyms was practically out in the open. Athletes would inject themselves in the locker room, train together, and openly trade information. It was part of the culture, a kind of open secret everyone knew about and nobody bothered to hide. That transparency disappeared once the laws tightened and the risks increased. With criminalization, the market didn't vanish, it just moved. Today, steroid distribution is still very much alive, but far more underground. Deals happen quietly, through trusted contacts, and buying steroids is no longer an innocent gym habit. It's now a risky activity for both users and sellers. This shift pushed the entire culture under the rug, turning something that used to be visible into something silent, coded, and often dangerous. This underground atmosphere also shaped how the public sees bodybuilding. Less transparency creates more speculation and more mystery, widening the gap between what people see on stage and what really happens behind the scenes. Before the 1990s, the gym landscape was completely different from what we see today. Gyms were smaller, grittier, and almost entirely geared toward bodybuilders and hardcore lifters. That environment had its own identity: iron plates, brutal training, and a competitive vibe that shaped the lifestyle of everyone there. And inside that world, steroid use didn't just exist, it was visible. Many athletes injected themselves right in the locker rooms without a second thought. It was a time when everything was more direct and far less polished. But that reality began to change when premium gym chains started appearing. Modern spaces with air conditioning, brand new machines, and a focus on the general public, not just athletes. This new business model turned the fitness world into a mass market product, promoting health, aesthetics, and well-being in an accessible way. But at the same time, it pushed traditional bodybuilding to the margins. The hardcore culture lost its spotlight, and with it, the openness that once existed about steroid use. With the new customer profile and the fit lifestyle message taking over, talking about drugs became inappropriate. The sport grew more reserved, and the substance use that used to be out in the open became completely hidden. Everything moved to quiet conversations, restricted contacts, and closed-off groups. What used to be part of the routine became a complete taboo, and anyone still competing in bodybuilding had to adapt to this silence imposed by the modern fitness environment. Still, even with all this change, one thing didn't shift: steroids continue to circulate in gyms across the country. The difference is that now it happens far from the public eye, inside an underground network of referrals and whispered agreements. Looking at the full history of bodybuilding, it's clear the sport has evolved to levels nobody could have imagined. Modern physiques are insanely dense, incredibly heavy, and rely on advanced pharmacological strategies to be built. It's not just heavy training or a perfect diet. It's a complex mix of techniques, science, and preparation that shapes true human mountains. This evolution is stunning, but it also raises important questions about where this path ultimately leads. What's interesting is that the more complex bodybuilding becomes, the smaller its footprint is in mainstream culture. The sport's visibility doesn't match its physical evolution. Today, many young fans only know the Mr. Olympia champion from a photo floating around social media or in a specialized magazine. They admire the size, the definition, the visual impact, but rarely understand the process behind it. Everything that doesn't appear on stage, the sacrifices, the risks, the extreme discipline, the mental pressure, the weight of preparation, stays hidden from most people. And a big part of this lack of understanding comes from the absence of transparency within the sport itself. Even though bodybuilding demands total dedication, the public rarely gets access to the full reality behind the scenes. The processes, the strategies, and especially the risks tied to substance use all remain wrapped in silence. Having an open conversation about steroids and the pharmacological history of bodybuilding would be a crucial step for the future of the sport. Showing the truth wouldn't take away from the athlete's achievements. In fact, it would highlight just how extreme their journey really is. That honesty wouldn't just protect beginners. It would also honor the commitment of professionals who literally sculpt their bodies like living works of art, pushing past limits most people don't even know exist. And after learning about this entire journey, from the first champions to the sport's most extreme transformations, it becomes clear that bodybuilding is far more than just muscle. It's history, dedication, sacrifice, and above all, a universe full of nuances that very few people truly understand. If you made it this far, that already shows you're part of a special group. People who want to go beyond the surface and actually understand what lies behind these incredible physiques. So before you jump to the next video, let me give you a direct invitation. If this content helped you see the sport from a new angle, hit that like button. It helps the channel a lot and shows that it's worth continuing to bring stories like this. And if you want to support our work even further, consider becoming a channel member. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications too, because we're preparing a lot of videos about bodybuilding history, behind-the-scenes curiosities, and deep dive analyses you won't find just anywhere. And of course, I want to hear from you. What surprised you the most about this whole evolution? And since you stayed all the way to the end, don't stop now. On the final screen, you'll see a video I know you're going to enjoy. I'll see you in the next chapter of this series.